Single dad finds bride chained to a tree. What happens next will break you. Ethan Miller stood on the porch of his new home, a modest cabin nestled near the wooded trails of Colorado. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and a quiet stillness that wrapped around the house like a promise. Behind him, his 8-year-old daughter Lily tugged at the sleeves of her oversized sweater, still drowsy from the early wake-up call, but wide-eyed with curiosity at the new world around her. They had left the city behind after a year of tiptoeing, around silence that had settled in when Rebecca, Ethan's wife and Lily's mother, passed away unexpectedly. The apartment had become a museum of absence, where every corner whispered memories too heavy to carry. This move was not just a change of scenery. It was a decision to begin again, far from the noise, far from the shadows. Ethan's days were now filled with the routine of unpacking boxes, fixing creaky steps, and helping Lily adjust to her new school. He worked remotely as a freelance illustrator, his desk facing a large window that looked out into the forest. Every few hours, he would glance up from his sketchpad to check if Lily's laughter was echoing from the backyard, or if she was sitting by the porch steps with her sketchbook, trying to mimic his strokes. The locals had been kind, though reserved. A few neighbors had introduced themselves, mostly retirees or outdoor enthusiasts who had chosen peace over proximity. The town itself was small, with a single grocery store, a post office, and a charming little cafe run by a retired couple who remembered everyone's names by their second visit. For Ethan, that simplicity was a relief. For Lily, it was an adventure. She had already started collecting rocks from their walks, giving each one a name and a story. Her room was slowly transforming into a museum of tiny treasures, feathers, pressed flowers, pine cones, and crayon drawings taped to the walls. Ethan watched her with quiet admiration. She was adapting faster than he could have hoped, her resilience a daily reminder that healing wasn't always dramatic. It was often gentle, gradual. One Sunday morning, they ventured further into one of the less-traveled trails, following a path lined with wildflowers and tall grasses that brushed against their legs. Ethan held Lily's hand as they walked, their boots crunching against the dirt and twigs. The world was waking up with them, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. They stopped by a small clearing where a tree with low branches invited Lily to climb. Ethan watched her with a half smile, his heart aching in that quiet fatherly way only parents understood, pride and fear intertwined in every breath. Then, as Lily swung from a branch and laughed, Ethan heard something unusual, a faint sound, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Lily stopped and looked around. "What?" Ethan motioned for her to stay still. He turned his head toward the dense thicket off the trail. The sound came again, softer this time, like someone exhaling or calling out faintly. His brow furrowed. It was probably an animal, maybe the wind, but something made him step closer. "Stay there, Lily," he said, his voice calm but firm. He moved cautiously, pushing branches aside until he reached a narrow space between two tall pines. At first he saw nothing, just tangled underbrush and shadows. But then, just beyond a patch of ferns, he saw her. A young woman, dressed in what looked like a wedding gown, sat on the ground with her back against a tree. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy and unfocused. A ribbon of white satin bound her wrists loosely in front of her, not tight like a restraint, but almost symbolic, like part of a costume or a gesture. "Hey," Ethan said gently, approaching slowly, hands visible. "Are you okay?" The woman blinked slowly, her mouth parting as if to speak, but no words came out. She looked down at her hands, then back at Ethan. There was a kind of confusion in her gaze, not panic, but a haunting uncertainty. I think I'm lost," she whispered, her voice brittle. Ethan knelt beside her, careful not to move too fast. Nearby. "Can I help you?" "I'm Ethan. My daughter and I were walking." She nodded slowly, eyes flicking toward the direction he came from. "I don't know how I got here." Her lips trembled as she spoke. Her dress was dirty at the hem, the once white lace now tinged with brown and green from the forest floor. She didn't appear injured, but something about her posture, the way she clutched the ribbon, the way her body folded in on itself, told Ethan that she was far from fine. He glanced back toward the trail where Lily was waiting, then back to the woman. "Let me get my daughter and we'll take you somewhere safe. There's a clinic in town," he said. The woman nodded again. "Please, I don't want to be alone." As Ethan helped her to her feet, she leaned on him lightly, her steps unsure. He called for Lily, who came running, eyes wide at the sight of the woman in the strange white dress. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder. "She needs our help," he said softly. "Let's get her home." They walked back through the trail together, the three of them an unexpected trio against the vastness of the woods. And as the trees gave way to open sky, Ethan couldn't help but feel that whatever had brought this woman into their lives was only the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand. But he was ready to find out. The walk back toward the Miller cabin was slow, marked by the careful steps of the young woman who barely seemed present in her own body. Ethan supported her gently by the elbow, making sure not to overwhelm her with questions. Lily walked just ahead, glancing back frequently with wide, curious eyes, sensing the weight of the moment without fully understanding it. The woman's wedding dress swayed awkwardly with each step, snagging on low branches and dragging against the dirt. The satin ribbon, still wrapped loosely around her wrists, fluttered in the breeze, its soft movements contrasting the tension that surrounded her. Ethan kept glancing at the woman's face, trying to read more in the lines of her expression, but all he could see was exhaustion and confusion. Her eyes remained lowered, staring at the ground as if anchoring herself there. When they reached the clearing that bordered the small gravel road leading to Ethan's home, the woman's pace slowed even further. She hesitated, her gaze flicking nervously from the house to the woods behind them. Ethan noticed her trembling subtly, as if the weight of simply standing outside the trees had become too much. "We are almost there," Ethan said softly, not wanting to startle her. Moment inside. "It is safe. You can rest for a..." She nodded, her lips pressing together tightly, as though trying to keep herself from falling apart. Ethan guided her up the porch steps, then into the house where the warm smell of cedar and faint traces of breakfast still lingered in the air. Lily, watching closely, quietly set a glass of water on the kitchen table, her small fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "Please sit down," Ethan offered, pulling out a chair and gesturing to the table. The woman lowered herself slowly into the seat, holding the glass between both hands, but not drinking. She looked up at Ethan, her expression softened by gratitude but still clouded with uncertainty. "My name is Ethan. This is my daughter Lily. You are safe here," he said gently, crouching down so he could meet her eyes without looming over her. She nodded again, swallowing hard before speaking. I am Sarah Jennings." Her voice was faint, but the name hung in the air as if it carried more weight than she intended. Ethan offered a reassuring smile. "Happened? Are you hurt?" "Sarah, it is nice to meet you. Can you tell me what..." Sarah shook her head slowly, then rubbed at her wrists where the satin ribbon had left faint impressions on her skin. I ran away. From my wedding. I could not go through with it." Her words spilled out unevenly, like they had been trapped beneath the surface for too long, struggling to find their way out. Ethan's brow furrowed, concern deepening in his expression. "Were you out there all night? You ran from the ceremony?" Sarah nodded faintly. "The woods, then I meant to. I do not remember how long I got lost." I think I wandered deeper into the confusion in her eyes, made Ethan pause. Something about the way she spoke felt fractured, as though parts of the story were missing, even for her. She did not seem injured physically, but her mind seemed clouded, disconnected from the events she was describing. "I'm going to call the clinic," Ethan said calmly. "Sure you are okay. Just to have someone check on..." "You make..." Sarah's fingers tightened around the glass, her knuckles turning white for a moment before she slowly nodded. "Thank you." Ethan picked up the phone and dialed the local clinic. The nurse on duty, Claire Henderson, answered after 2 rings. She listened carefully as Ethan explained the situation, promising to send someone immediately. While they waited, Ethan offered Sarah a blanket, noticing that despite the mild weather, her shoulders were still trembling beneath the thin layers of her dress. She accepted it silently, wrapping it tightly around herself as if it might hold her together. Lily sat across the table, her gaze moving between Ethan and Sarah. Though she said nothing, her questions were written plainly across her face. Ethan caught her eye and gave a small shake of his head, signaling her to stay patient. Within 30 minutes, Claire arrived at the house, her calm presence immediately filling the room with a sense of quiet authority. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a firm, gentle tone that put people at ease. After introducing herself, she knelt beside Sarah and began asking careful, non-intrusive questions. "Do you remember eating or drinking anything unusual today, Sarah?" Claire asked softly. Sarah shook her head, her fingers still clinging to the blanket. "No, just the morning at the house. I remember my mother helping me get ready. There was a lot of rushing, a lot of noise. I felt like I could not breathe." Claire nodded, listening intently. "Woods? Do you remember leaving the house?" Walking into Sarah's brow furrowed as she closed her eyes tightly, her lips pressing together. I do not remember deciding to leave. I just remember running. I remember trees, then sitting down. My hands were tied with that ribbon, but I did it myself." Claire's gaze softened, of fear, maybe even a panic attack. "Thank you for telling me." "It sounds like you had a very intense moment," Ethan watched, as Sarah's shoulders sagged further beneath the weight of those words. He could see the struggle in her expression, the part of her that felt ashamed, the part that still did not fully understand what had happened. Claire stood and turned to Ethan, lowering her voice slightly. "She needs rest, hydration, and observation for the next 24 hours. I will notify the local authorities just in case her family has reported her missing, but I will keep her name private until we know more." Ethan nodded, grateful for Claire's discretion. Sarah looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face as though she wanted reassurance that he was not going to send her away. "You can stay here tonight," Ethan said before she could ask. "Is not much, but it is quiet and safe. There is a guest room upstairs." Sarah's lips quivered as she offered a small nod, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You, Ethan, I do not know what I would have done if you had not found me." Ethan gave a gentle smile, standing up and offering her a steadying hand. "That is what matters. You are here now." As Sarah followed him slowly upstairs to the guest room, the house settled into an unfamiliar quiet, the kind that holds a space for something new, something uncertain, but not yet frightening. Downstairs, Lily remained seated at the kitchen table, her eyes wide with questions and her small voice breaking the silence. "Daddy, is she going to be okay?" Ethan looked down at his daughter, the corners of his mouth softening. "I hope so, Lily. I really hope so." And though he could not explain why, Ethan felt deep in his chest that Sarah's arrival was no random event. She had come into their lives for a reason, and whatever story she carried with her was only beginning to unfold. The morning light spilled softly through the thin curtains of the guest room, casting pale gold patterns across the wooden floor. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She had not slept. Instead, the hours passed slowly in restless silence, her eyes fixed on the small window that framed the tall trees outside, standing still against the breeze. Downstairs, Ethan moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the same steady care he gave to every morning ritual. Lily sat at the table, her chin resting in one hand as she doodled circles on a scrap of paper. Though she tried to focus on her drawing, her eyes kept flicking toward the staircase, wondering if their unexpected guest would come down. Ethan was about to call Lily for breakfast when the soft creak of the stairs reached his ears. Sarah appeared. In the doorway, the blanket clutched around her like armor, her eyes shadowed by fatigue but alert. She paused at the threshold, hesitating as though unsure if she belonged there. "Good morning," Ethan offered, his voice gentle, making sure not to startle her. "At least a little rest." "I hope you got." Sarah gave a faint nod, her fingers tightening on the blanket. "A little," she said quietly. "I made coffee if you would like some." "Or tea," Ethan added, gesturing toward the small table where Lily's cereal bowl sat half-finished. "And breakfast." Sarah's eyes softened at the gesture. She stepped into the room slowly, taking the seat Ethan pulled out for her. Lily offered a shy smile, and after a moment of hesitation, Sarah smiled back. I do not usually wake up in a stranger's house," Sarah said, the attempt at humor barely masking the shakiness in her voice. Ethan responded with a soft chuckle, not unkind. "I imagine not, but you are not a stranger now." The words hung there between them, simple but honest. Sarah looked down at her hands, turning the corner of the blanket between her fingers. "I should tell you more," and she began, her voice steadying a little. My name is Sarah Jennings. I live about 50 miles from here in Crestwood. My family, well, they are well known there. My father owns a few businesses in town, and my mother is involved in several charity organizations." Ethan listened carefully, nodding but not interrupting. Lily sat quietly, her wide eyes fixed on Sarah, absorbing every word. "My wedding was supposed to be yesterday," Sarah continued, "to a man named Thomas Caldwell. His family is similar to mine, business owners involved in the same circles. It was all very planned, very proper." She paused, her lips pressing into a thin line as she gathered her thoughts. "I was raised to follow the rules, to do what was expected. Thomas and we dated for 2 years. It was always comfortable, polite. But as the wedding got closer, I started to feel like I was being pulled into a life that was not mine. The decisions were made for me, where we would live, what my role would be, even how many children we were expected to have. It was all decided without me really having a voice." Ethan kept his gaze on her, his expression soft but attentive. He could see the strain behind her calm tone, the effort it took to tell this story without breaking. "I tried to speak up," Sarah said, her voice lowering. "I tried to explain that I wanted something different, something simpler, quieter. But every time I did, I was told I was being difficult, ungrateful. My mother called it cold feet. My father reminded me of how much had been invested in the wedding. The more I resisted, the tighter the grip seemed to become." She looked up at Ethan then, her eyes searching his face for any sign of judgment. Finding none, she continued, "Yesterday morning I woke up early. The house was full of people, florists, caterers, my mother barking orders, my father pacing. I could hear the string quartet practicing outside. It was all so loud. I went into the dressing room, put on the dress they had chosen for me, and I sat there staring at myself in the mirror. I felt like I was watching a stranger." Sarah's fingers moved unconsciously to the edge of the blanket again, twisting it tighter. "I do not even remember deciding to leave. One moment I was sitting there, and the next I was out the back door, running through the garden, across the field, into the woods. I did not stop until I could not hear the music anymore. I just kept going." Ethan exhaled slowly, processing the story she had shared. It explained the confusion, the disorientation, the ribbon tied loosely around her wrists, a gesture of breaking free, of cutting ties. "You must have been so scared," he said softly. Sarah gave a small nod, her eyes glistening with the tears she had fought hard to hold back. "Felt like if I stayed, I would disappear." For a long moment the room was quiet. Only the ticking of the old clock above the kitchen door marked the passage of time. Lily reached across the table, offering Sarah a small drawing she had made, a simple picture of 3 stick figures standing beneath a tree. "This is you," Lily said softly, pointing to one of the figures, "with me and my dad." Sarah's lips trembled as she took the paper carefully, folding it between her fingers like something precious. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered. Ethan stood, pouring a fresh cup of tea and setting it gently in front of Sarah. "To stay as long as you need," he said. "No pressure, no expectations. You are welcome," Sarah met his eyes, gratitude filling her expression. I appreciate that more than I can say." Just then, there was a soft knock at the door. Ethan excused himself and crossed the room, opening the door to find Claire from the clinic standing there again, this time with a small envelope in hand. "I wanted to let you know," Claire said quietly, glancing inside and catching sight of Sarah at the table. I called the sheriff's office. There has been no missing person report under her name, but her parents did contact the local police where she lives to file a report late last night. Ethan nodded, thanking Claire for the update. He closed the door gently behind her and returned to the kitchen. "Your family is looking for you," he said carefully, watching Sarah's reaction. Sarah's shoulders tensed, but she nodded slowly, as though she had expected this. "Figure out what I am going to do," she said, her voice firmer now. "I need to, but not today. Today I just need to breathe." Ethan nodded in understanding. "You have that space here." And so, with the tension of the truth now in the open, the day unfolded quietly. Sarah remained seated at the table, sipping her tea while Lily returned to her drawings. Outside, the wood stood silent and watchful, the trees holding their secrets close. The town of Maple Ridge was not a place where secrets stayed hidden for long. Word traveled on the breeze, carried from the post office to the cafe, from the market stalls to the church pews. Even in a community known for its kindness and discretion, curiosity had a way of creeping through the cracks. By the time the sun set on the day Sarah Jennings appeared at Ethan Miller's doorstep, most of the townspeople had heard, in one form or another, about the young woman in the wedding dress found wandering near the trails. It began with small whispers at the general store, where Mrs. Dalton, the owner, noticed Ethan buying extra groceries and asked casually if he was expecting company. Claire Henderson, who had visited the house twice already, had not offered details, but the mere presence of a nurse visiting Ethan's home raised eyebrows. Soon, speculation grew into quiet conversations, shared over coffee and at the edges of Sunday service. Ethan was aware of the eyes that followed him more closely than usual as he made his rounds through town. Though no one asked directly, their expressions spoke volumes. There was genuine concern mixed with the unavoidable curiosity of a small community where every unfamiliar face sparked questions. At the cafe where Sarah had ventured timidly with Ethan and Lily one afternoon, the chatter hushed the moment they walked in. The older patrons lifted their heads, offering polite nods, while the younger ones exchanged glances beneath lowered lashes. Ethan kept his shoulders square and his tone calm as he ordered coffee and a hot chocolate for Lily, but he could feel the weight of every gaze. Sarah sat quietly beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes avoiding contact. She felt the attention, sharp and pressing, but she kept her chin lifted. Despite the ache of anxiety tightening in her chest, she was determined not to shrink under the weight of other people's assumptions. She knew what they were thinking. A runaway bride showing up in their peaceful town, arriving at the home of a widowed father, was enough to stir imagination in all directions. The cafe owner, Margaret Lewis, a woman in her early 60s with soft grey hair tied back in a neat bun, approached their table with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades navigating the emotions of others. "Welcome," she said warmly, placing the mugs gently on the table. Her gaze met Sarah's without a hint of judgment. "I am Margaret. If there is anything you need, just let me know." Sarah looked up, surprised by the kindness in the woman's tone. She managed a small smile and nodded in appreciation. "Thank you," she replied softly. Margaret smiled back and moved on, leaving behind an air of reassurance that softened the edges of the room. Outside the cafe, the same whispers followed them. At the grocery store, Ethan noticed Mr. Carver, the elderly clerk, giving Sarah a lingering look as she picked out a loaf of bread. At the school drop-off, a few parents exchanged hushed words while watching Ethan walk Lily to class with Sarah, standing quietly nearby. Though the speculations swirled around them, no one approached Ethan directly with their questions. Instead, the town's curiosity simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment, or perhaps for enough courage to ask outright. Back at the house, Sarah spent her days cautiously settling into the rhythm of life in the Miller home. She helped prepare meals, assisted Lily with her art projects, and took quiet walks along the edge of the property where the trees met the clearing. Each day, she seemed to regain a little more of herself, though the shadows beneath her eyes spoke of thoughts that still weighed heavily on her mind. Ethan, true to his word, did not press her for more than she was ready to share. He noticed the way her hands trembled slightly when the subject of her family came up and respected the unspoken boundary she had set. Instead, he offered simple gestures, a cup of tea, a shared meal, a seat by the fire at the end of the day. In these small acts of kindness, Sarah found a space where she could begin to breathe again. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching Lily chase butterflies across the yard, Sarah turned to Ethan with a question that had clearly been building in her mind. "Do people always talk this much here?" she asked, her lips curling into a faint smile. Ethan chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "It is not usually this intense, but a runaway bride showing up in a town like this. You are the biggest news we have had in a while." Sarah nodded, her smile fading slightly. "I figured as much." Ethan studied her for a moment, then spoke gently. "They will get used to you being here. People talk because they are curious, not because they mean harm. Most of them are good-hearted." Sarah sighed, leaning her head against the back of the chair. "It is not the first time I have felt like I am being watched, judged, but at least here, it feels different, like I can still decide who I want to be." Ethan nodded slowly. "You can. No one here gets to decide that for you." The next few days brought a small but noticeable shift. Margaret invited Sarah to help at the cafe during a weekend event, a local crafts fair that gathered families from across the county. Though hesitant at first, Sarah accepted the offer, encouraged by Ethan and Lily's enthusiasm. When the day arrived, Sarah stood behind the counter at the cafe, helping serve coffee and pastries to the steady stream of visitors. She smiled more easily now, exchanging polite words with the townspeople, some of whom offered friendly nods without prying questions. A few even expressed quiet admiration for her courage, though they did so with the gentle distance of people who understood the value of giving space. Ethan watched from a corner table with Lily by his side, noticing how Sarah's posture grew, a little taller with each passing hour. She was beginning to claim her place, not as the runaway bride everyone had whispered about, but as Sarah, the woman who stood behind the counter, sharing smiles and simple conversations. By the end of the day, as the fair began to wind down and the sun dipped low behind the hills, Sarah sat beside Ethan on the porch once more, her expression lighter than it had been in days. "I did not think I could feel normal again," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. Ethan gave a gentle nod, his eyes meeting hers. "Like yourself. It is not about being normal. It is about feeling." Sarah smiled, and for the first time since she arrived, the smile reached her eyes. The days following the fair unfolded with a calmness that felt almost unfamiliar to Sarah, but deeply welcome. Each morning began with the soft sound of birds outside the window, followed by the distant rustle of Lily's small feet running down the stairs. Ethan's voice, steady and warm, filled the house as he moved through their simple routines, offering Sarah a space that did not ask questions or demand explanations. In this quiet rhythm, something inside her began to ease. At first, Sarah thought that the peace of the place might push away the thoughts that had followed her from Crestwood, but instead, the calm seemed to give her mind the safety it needed to start putting together the scattered pieces of memory. Not in sudden flashes, but in gentle waves, moments began to return, soft, fragmented images that surfaced when she least expected them. It started one morning while she helped Lily pack her school bag. The sight of the little girl carefully folding a piece of paper with one of her drawings triggered a memory so sharp it made Sarah pause mid-motion. She saw herself seated at the large dining table of her parents' house, folding place cards with her mother hovering behind her, directing every step. "Make sure the handwriting is perfect, Sarah. People will notice." Her mother's voice had been sweet but lined with expectation, the kind of tone that did not leave room for disagreement. Sarah blinked, pulling herself back to the present. As Lily looked up at her, curious, "Are you okay, Sarah?" The gentle question brought her back fully. She offered Lily a smile and nodded, remembering something. "Yes, just..." But the memory lingered, stirring others. Throughout the week, small details began to surface. The scent of the flowers arranged meticulously in the garden where the ceremony was meant to take place. The polished silver of the cutlery set laid out for the reception. the constant pressure of decisions being made around her, never with her. One afternoon, while standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes, Sarah felt her chest tighten as another fragment rose to the surface. She remembered sitting in the bridal suite just hours before the wedding, her hands trembling as she held the bouquet her mother had insisted upon. White roses, lilies, not a single petal out of place. The room had been full of voices, dresses, swishing, the air thick with perfume. She had wanted to leave then, to stand up and say something, but the weight of so many expectations had pressed her down into the chair. "It is just nerves," she heard her mother saying in the memory, brushing off Sarah's unease with a wave of her hand. Every bride feels this way. But Sarah had known even then that it was not nerves, it was dread. In the present, Ethan noticed the way Sarah would occasionally drift off into thought, her fingers pausing in whatever task she was doing. He did not interrupt those moments, but he remained close, ready if she wanted to speak. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Sarah sat by the fire, her knees drawn up beneath the soft blanket Ethan had draped across the back of the couch. Ethan settled into the chair across from her, his sketch pad resting in his lap, though he did not draw. He simply waited, sensing that Sarah was on the edge of saying something. She stared into the flames for a long moment before speaking. "It was not just the wedding," she said softly. "It was everything leading up to it. Every choice was made for me. The dress, the flowers, even the music. I kept thinking that maybe once the day came I would feel excited, or at least content. But I did not. I felt trapped." Ethan's eyes remained steady on hers, his voice calm. "Space to choose." "It sounds like you were never given?" The Sarah nodded, her throat tightening. "I was not. I wanted to tell them I was not ready, that maybe I never would be, but they would not hear me." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, her hands clasped tightly together. "I remember the morning so clearly now. I woke up early before the house got busy. I thought maybe if I could just take a moment to breathe, to think. But even then, my mother came into the room, already talking about the photographers, the schedule, the guests arriving. There was no space to say anything. I felt like I was suffocating." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan leaned forward, setting his sketchpad aside. "I am glad you ran," he said simply. "You listened to yourself even when no one else did." Sarah felt a rush of emotion at his words, the validation so gentle but powerful that it brought tears to her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, but Ethan did not look away. "I did not know where I was going," she admitted. "The woods. And I kept walking until I could not anymore. I just knew I needed to go. And then I was in." Ethan nodded. "Sometimes the body knows what the mind has not had the chance to say." They sat in silence again, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, their branches swaying gently beneath the weight of the evening sky. As the days continued, the memories became clearer. Sarah spoke of the little ways she had tried to assert herself in the months before the wedding, suggesting a different venue, asking for a simpler ceremony, wanting fewer guests. Each time, her ideas were met with polite dismissals, wrapped in smiles that never reached the eyes of the people closest to her. Her father had spoken often about tradition, about the importance of appearances. Her mother had focused on perfection, on making sure the event was everything society expected it to be. And Thomas, though kind on the surface, had shown little interest in understanding Sarah's growing unease. He had called her worries irrational, assured her that everything would be fine, that she would feel differently once they were married. But Sarah had not felt differently. She had felt invisible. Sharing these memories did not erase the pain, but each conversation seemed to lift a little of the weight from Sarah's shoulders. Ethan listened without judgment, offering steady presence rather than solutions. His patience created a space where Sarah could let the memories come without fear. One night, after another quiet evening by the fire, Sarah stood and stretched, her body relaxing in a way it had not since she arrived. She looked at Ethan, gratitude softening the lines of her face. "Thank you for letting me be here," she said, "for giving me time." Ethan met her gaze, his voice as steady as ever. "Feel safe here. You do not owe me thanks. But I am glad you," as Sarah turned toward the stairs, ready to call it a night. She paused and looked back at him. "I feel like, for the first time in a long while, I am starting to remember who I am." The soft arrival of spring in Maple Ridge brought with it longer days and the first blush of green across the hills. The woods surrounding Ethan's home were waking from their winter stillness, the trails growing lively with the chatter of birds and the hum of new life. Within the walls of the house, the atmosphere had grown warmer too. Sarah, though still finding her footing, moved more freely, her smile appearing more often and her voice gaining steadiness. Yet beneath the calm surface, an undercurrent of uncertainty remained, one that neither Ethan nor Sarah could fully ignore. The peace of their days was broken late one afternoon when the sound of tires on gravel drew Ethan's attention from the back porch. A sleek black sedan, out of place among the worn pickup trucks and dirt-dusted vehicles of the town, rolled up the narrow driveway and came to a stop in front of the house. Ethan stood slowly, his eyes narrowing as the driver's door opened and a man stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored jacket. Thomas Caldwell was exactly as Sarah had described, polished, composed, with a confidence that hovered just at the edge of arrogance. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, his posture straight, and his eyes sharp as they scanned the property. When his gaze landed on Ethan, there was no greeting, only an assessing look, as though calculating the man standing before him. "Ethan Miller?" Thomas asked, his tone brisk. Ethan nodded, stepping down from the porch but keeping his distance. "Can I help you?" Thomas's jaw clenched slightly before he spoke again. "Believe she is here." "I am looking for Sarah Jennings." The weight of those words hung between them, and Ethan held the man's gaze for a long moment before replying. "She is here, but whether she wants to see you is up to her." Thomas's lips pressed into a thin line. "She disappeared without a word. Her parents are worried sick, and I have been driving through half the state looking for her." Ethan remained calm, his voice steady. "She is safe. That is what matters right now." From inside the house, Sarah stood frozen at the sound of Thomas's voice drifting through the open window. She felt her stomach twist, the memories of that last chaotic morning rushing back with sharp clarity. Part of her wanted to run again, to hide from the confrontation she knew was coming, but another part of her, the part that had begun to rebuild, held her in place. She stepped outside slowly, the door creaking behind her as she walked onto the porch. Thomas's head snapped in her direction, his expression shifting from frustration to something that resembled relief. "Sarah," he said, stepping forward. She raised a hand, stopping him before he could move any closer. "Thomas." His eyes softened slightly as he looked at her, taking in the sight of the woman who had vanished from their wedding day. "You could have called," he said quietly. "You could have said something." Sarah's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "To say, I did not know how to make anyone listen." "I did not know what." Thomas took a breath, his eyes narrowing again as he glanced toward Ethan. "Away," and stayed. "Here, with a stranger." "So you ran." Ethan's posture remained relaxed, but his eyes stayed locked on Thomas, watching for any sign of aggression. Sarah shook her head slowly. "Ethan is not the issue here. This is not about him. It is about me, about the choices I was never given the chance to make." Thomas took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I thought you cared about me too. I came here because I care about you." "Because I did care about you," Sarah replied, her voice soft but clear. "I still care enough to be honest with you now, but I was never allowed to be honest before. Every time I tried, I was shut down. Every time I asked for space, I was told I was being dramatic. Every decision about our future was made without me." Thomas's expression tightened, a flicker of defensiveness crossing his features. "Weddings, Sarah. People help plan weddings, families get involved." It was as Sarah's eyes filled with the quiet strength she had been building since arriving in Maple Ridge. "It was not about the wedding. It was about everything. I was never asking for help with the flowers or the menu. I was asking to be heard, and no one was listening." Thomas looked away, exhaling sharply through his nose. For the first time, the anger in his expression faltered, replaced by something closer to confusion, perhaps even regret. "I thought I was doing what was best," he said, softer now. "You deserved. I thought I was giving you the life." Sarah's voice softened too, though the firmness in her words remained. "You wanted, but it was not the life I chose." Maybe it was the life for a moment. Neither of them spoke. The breeze stirred the leaves above them, the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Finally, Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground before returning to meet her eyes. "I did not come here to fight. I came because I was worried. I needed to know that you were all right." "I am all right," Sarah replied, "or at least I'm getting there." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, then glanced toward Ethan once more, as if weighing his words carefully. "I will go," Thomas said, his tone less harsh than when he arrived. "You ever want to come home, you know where to find me. But if you ever want to talk," if Sarah gave a small nod, not out of agreement, but as acknowledgement of his words. Thomas turned without another word, walking back to his car and driving away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. Ethan remained where he stood, watching Sarah closely, ready to offer support if she needed it, but giving her the space to process the moment on her own. She leaned against the porch railing, exhaling slowly, her body relaxing as the tension of the encounter ebbed away. "I thought it would feel worse," she admitted after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan gave a quiet nod. "You spoke your truth. That has a way of making things lighter." Sarah turned toward him, her eyes softening. "Thank you for standing by me." Ethan offered a gentle smile. "Any time." Inside the house, Lily's laughter echoed faintly from her room, a reminder that life, even with its sharp turns and difficult conversations, continued moving forward. The air was cooler the following week, the lingering touch of winter clinging to the early mornings despite the blooms beginning to spread across Maple Ridge. The confrontation with Thomas had left Sarah feeling both exhausted and strangely relieved, as if the weight of carrying unspoken truths for so long had finally begun to lift. Yet even as the tension from that encounter softened, another kind of reckoning awaited her, a quieter, more personal one that had nothing to do with Thomas and everything to do with herself. Ethan noticed the subtle shift in Sarah's demeanor as the days passed. She moved through the house with the same gentle grace, helping with meals and sharing small conversations with Lily, but there was a new kind of reflection in her eyes, as if she were watching her own thoughts unfold just beneath the surface. She often stood at the window longer than necessary, her gaze distant, her fingers tapping absent rhythms against the frame. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Sarah broke the comfortable silence between them. "I think I need to talk to my parents," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the flames dancing before them. "Not just because they are worried, because I need to tell them how I feel, how I have felt for a long time." Ethan nodded, his expression soft with understanding. "Do you want me to go with you?" Sarah smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his. "On my own. Thank you, but I think this is something I have to do." The next morning, Sarah called the number she had been avoiding for weeks. Her mother answered on the first ring, her voice tight with a mix of concern and restrained frustration. "Sarah, finally, where are you? Do you have any idea how worried we have been?" Sarah closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath before responding. "Needed time. And now I need to talk to you and Dad. In person." "I am safe, Mom." There was a pause on the other end, the sharp edge of her mother's tone softening, just enough to let the worry peek through. "All right," her mother agreed. "When?" "Tomorrow," Sarah replied. "I will come by the house." The drive to Crestwood was both familiar and strange. The winding roads that led back to her childhood home were lined with the same rows of trees she had passed countless times before, but they felt different now, less like barriers, more like witnesses to the choices she was finally ready to make for herself. When Sarah arrived, the Jennings estate stood just as perfectly maintained as ever. The manicured hedges, the polished brass fixtures, the white pillars, all symbols of the order and control that had defined her upbringing. She parked at the end of the long driveway and took a moment before stepping out of the car, gathering the courage she had been building since the day she ran. Her mother was waiting at the door, arms crossed, her face carefully composed. Behind her, Sarah's father stood, his expression unreadable. They greeted her with stiff hugs, gestures more out of habit than warmth, and led her into the sitting room where countless family discussions had been staged, always polite, always controlled. Sarah did not wait for the pleasantries. She sat down across from them, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. "I know you are upset," she began, her voice steady, irresponsible, "but I need you to hear me out. I know you think what I did was selfish." Her mother opened her mouth to interrupt, but her father raised a hand, signaling her to let Sarah speak. "I spent so much of my life trying to be the daughter you wanted. I agreed to things I was not sure about, because I thought it would make you proud. I tried to be grateful, to be polite, to be everything you expected. But somewhere along the way I stopped recognizing myself." She paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "I did not run from the wedding because I was scared of commitment. I ran because I was scared of losing myself completely. I was scared because every time I said I wanted something different, you made me feel like I was wrong for wanting it, like I was disappointing you." Her mother's lips tightened, her arms still crossed, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her father remained silent, his expression harder to read. "I needed you to listen," Sarah continued, her voice softening but remaining firm. "Not to tell me what to do, just to hear me. Not to fix it." Her father leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. He exhaled slowly, and for the first time, his voice carried less authority and more uncertainty. "We never meant to make you feel trapped," he said. "Start the best life. We thought we were giving you the best." Sarah nodded, her throat tightening. "I know you love me, but love is not supposed to feel like a cage." Her mother finally lowered her arms, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the edge of the coffee table. "I just wanted you to be happy," her mother whispered, her voice cracking. "I know," Sarah replied gently, "but happiness has to be my choice." The room fell silent, the weight of the conversation settling over them like a heavy quilt. After a long pause, her father nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "We cannot change the past," he said, "but maybe we can start listening better now." Sarah felt a swell of emotion rise in her chest, not the sharp ache of regret, but something closer to hope. She leaned back in her seat, releasing a breath she had not realized she had been holding. "I would like that," she said. They sat together a little longer, the conversation turning softer, less formal. Her mother asked where she had been, staying, and Sarah spoke briefly about Maple Ridge, about Ethan and Lily, about the quiet kindness she had found there. There were no dramatic apologies, no sudden fixes, but for the first time there was a real exchange of words that felt honest. When Sarah stood to leave, her mother reached out, touching her arm gently. "Soon. Not because we ask you to, but because you want to. Come back." Sarah nodded, the smallest smile touching her lips. "I will." The drive back to Maple Ridge felt lighter. The familiar roads no longer weighted with dread. When she returned to the house, the sun was dipping, low casting golden light across the porch where Ethan was sitting, a book in his hands. He looked up as she approached, closing the book softly. "How did it go?" he asked. Sarah stood by the railing, looking out at the trees that surrounded the house, her heart steady. "It went better than I expected," she replied. "It is not perfect, but it is a start." Ethan gave a small nod, his gaze warm. "That is all any of us can ask for." Sarah smiled then, a real smile, one that reached her eyes, and stepped onto the porch, ready to continue the life she was, choosing for herself. The fresh breeze of early mornings in Maple Ridge carried the soft scent of wildflowers blooming along the nearby trails. The town, always wrapped in an almost bucolic serenity, moved at its own gentle pace where time seemed to slow down just enough to let each small detail be appreciated. For Sarah, This environment was becoming more than just a temporary refuge. With each sunrise, she allowed herself to lean a little further into the new routine that, almost without noticing, she was shaping for herself. After the visit to her parents, the silence that once felt oppressive turned into a safe space for reflection. The hard conversations had cleared a place within her, allowing her to look ahead without the constant weight of others' expectations. Ethan, with the same respectful and supportive posture he always maintained, continued to offer his presence without demands. His quiet companionship brought steadiness without pressure, and Sarah found comfort in the simplicity of their shared days. On the first morning after returning from Crestwood, Sarah woke before Lily and Ethan. The gentle hiss of water boiling in the kettle filled the kitchen as she made tea for herself, feeling for the first time in a long while that she was in control of the small gestures that shaped her day. She stood by the window, where the soft golden light of morning touched the leaves of the trees outside, and breathed deeply, absorbing that moment of calm. When Lily came downstairs, her hair still tousled and eyes sleepy, she found Sarah at the table, a mug in her hands and an open notebook before her. The little girl, as curious as ever, leaned on the edge of the table, peeking at Sarah's notes. "What are you writing?" Lily asked with genuine interest. Sarah smiled, closing the notebook gently. "Ideas. Things I would like to do." Lily, full of her usual enthusiasm, quickly suggested she always needs help. "You could work at Miss Margaret's cafe." The child's innocent suggestion planted a seed that would soon bloom into something more meaningful than either of them anticipated. Later that same day, while Sarah was walking through town to pick up a few groceries, she saw Margaret organizing boxes outside the cafe. The older woman greeted her with the warm smile everyone in town knew so well. "Well, if it isn't Miss Sarah," Margaret said, wiping her hands on her apron before stepping closer. "Settling in all right around here?" Sarah nodded, still shy but carrying a quiet firmness in her posture. "Wondering if you still needed help at the cafe?" "I am." "Actually, I was." Margaret raised an eyebrow, pleasantly surprised, then smiled even brighter. "Extra pair of hands. If you are serious, you could start as early as tomorrow." Always neat and so, without much ceremony but with significant meaning, Sarah took another step toward her own independence. Working at the cafe was far from the glamorous life her family might have imagined for her, but the simplicity of that daily routine brought her a satisfaction she had never known. Preparing coffee, organizing the shelves, exchanging polite conversations with the regulars, these small repeated gestures created a sense of belonging that no luxurious reception hall had ever offered her. Bit by bit, Sarah got to know the faces of the community better. There was Mr. Doyle, who ordered the same tea every morning and always complained about the weather. Mrs. Patterson, who enjoyed sharing stories about her grandchildren while waiting for her bread to be wrapped. Each interaction, each shared smile helped Sarah feel less like an outsider and more like a part of the fabric of Maple Ridge. Ethan, always observant, noticed the subtle changes. He saw how Sarah returned home at the end of each day with a gentle light in her eyes, how her smile no longer felt like a polite mask, but a true reflection of her growing peace. He respected the distance she still kept, never crossing boundaries, but it was impossible not to feel admiration for the strength she showed as she rebuilt her life. Lily, for her part, thrived in Sarah's constant presence. Game nights became a new tradition in their home, with Lily insisting that Sarah join every round. On Sundays, their hikes along the nearby trails were filled with laughter and discovery, as Lily pointed out each flower and unusual stone, while Ethan and Sarah walked side by side, sharing quiet glances that spoke more than words. Still, Sarah maintained a certain caution, a wall that she kept standing even in the lightest moments. She was grateful for everything Ethan and Lily offered her, and though she allowed herself to enjoy this new chapter, part of her remained guarded. A voice deep inside, a remnant of the years spent under the weight of others' control, reminded her to stay grounded. That was why, when Ethan casually mentioned one quiet afternoon that there was always space in the house if she wanted to make her stay permanent, Sarah listened carefully, then answered with honest clarity. "Thank you, Ethan, that means more than I can say, but for now I would like to keep my pace. Working at the cafe is my first real step towards standing on my own." Ethan nodded without a trace of disappointment, only respect. "I understand, and I am happy for you." That evening, after Lily had gone to bed and Ethan was reviewing sketches in his office, Sarah sat alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky. For the first time in her adult life, she felt the weight of the world lift. Not because she had escaped it, but because she was standing firmly on her own feet, carving a space for herself through her choices. There in the quiet of the night, she realized that this was not a place where she had arrived by accident. It was a home she was choosing, step by step, on her own terms. The weeks following the community fair unfolded with a comforting rhythm, each day settling into its place as if the town itself had conspired to provide Sarah the peace she had long been denied. Her work at the cafe had become more than just a way to sustain herself. It was a bridge, connecting her to the daily life of Maple Ridge, allowing her to weave herself into the fabric of the community, one conversation, one shared smile at a time. The gentle clinking of mugs, the rustle of newspapers, the laughter of children gathering outside after school, these became the soundtrack to her days. There was something grounding in the simplicity of preparing coffee, of exchanging greetings with familiar faces, of sharing small but sincere moments with people who saw her not as the runaway bride or the daughter of influential parents, but simply as Sarah. Though the cafe kept her busy, Sarah continued to spend evenings with Ethan and Lily. Their home had transformed from a place of temporary shelter into a space where she could breathe freely, where every small ritual, dinner at the table, stories shared under the soft glow of the porch light, laughter during board games, seemed to stitch her more firmly into the daily life of the Miller household. It was during one of these peaceful evenings, while the town was preparing for another small community event, that an idea began to take shape. Margaret, always involved in bringing the town together, mentioned organizing a music presentation with the local children. The fair had sparked a new interest in the younger ones, many of whom expressed a desire to learn more songs and participate again. Margaret, knowing Sarah's connection with music and remembering the beautiful performance at the fair, approached her casually while wiping down the cafe counter. "Sarah, I was wondering, would you consider helping the children prepare a little musical presentation for the spring gathering? They had such a great time last time, and they keep asking about it." Sarah, caught off guard but warmed by the invitation, hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I would love to," she answered, her voice steady. Word spread quickly among the families. Soon, Sarah found herself surrounded by a group of enthusiastic children eager to learn new songs, with Lily proudly at the front of the group, already declaring which songs they should include. The rehearsals began in the back room of the cafe, a space usually reserved for quiet afternoons and private gatherings, now filled with the energy of young voices and the joyful disarray of children learning to sing together. Sarah guided them with patience and gentle encouragement, her hands moving over the piano keys as naturally as if she had never stopped playing. The songs chosen were simple, light-hearted tunes that spoke of friendship, home, and the beauty of the changing seasons. With each practice, Sarah found herself smiling more freely, her posture relaxed, her heart lighter. Ethan often stopped by during the rehearsals, standing quietly near the door, watching as Sarah directed the group. There was a quiet admiration in his eyes, a respect for the grace with which she handled the children and the gentle authority she carried. Lily would wave at him from the front, grinning widely before returning to her part. As the day of the spring gathering approached, the excitement in town grew. Decorations appeared along the main streets, small flags and flowers adorning shop, windows and lamp posts. The townspeople spoke with anticipation about the event, looking forward to the shared celebration that had become a cherished tradition. On the evening of the gathering, the square filled with neighbors, friends, and families. Tables were arranged with homemade goods, crafts, and colorful displays of spring-themed decorations. The stage, simple but charming, stood at the center, ready for the performance. Sarah stood with the children behind the stage, giving last-minute words of encouragement. She knelt down to meet their eager eyes, her own expression filled with kindness. Remember, it is not about being perfect, she told them. What we have practiced together. It is about having fun and sharing the children. Nodded, some giggling nervously, others bouncing on their toes with excitement. Lily, standing close to Sarah, gave her a quick hug before taking her place at the front of the group. When the time came, the children stepped onto the stage, their eyes wide as they faced the gathered crowd. Sarah took her seat at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys as she looked out at the faces before her. Among them, she spotted Ethan, standing near the front, his gaze steady, offering the quiet support that had become so familiar. The first notes echoed across the square, followed by the soft, tentative voices of the children. Slowly, their confidence grew, the melody filling the space with warmth and joy. The audience listened attentively, many smiling, some swaying gently, to the rhythm of the music. As the final song ended, the applause rose loud and genuine, the energy of the crowd wrapping around the stage like a soft embrace. The children beamed, some clapping along with the audience, others looking toward their parents, their faces bright with pride. Sarah stood, offering a modest bow, her heart full. She felt the gratitude and acceptance of the community in every clap, in every kind word that followed. It was not the applause itself that moved her, but the shared moment, the sense of belonging that had quietly, steadily grown around her. After the performance, as people mingled and the evening settled into a gentle hum of conversation and laughter, Ethan approached Sarah, his expression warm. "That was beautiful," he said. "You gave them something special tonight." Sarah, still feeling the glow of the moment, smiled softly. "They did it. I just helped a little." Ethan shook his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Them how?" "To believe in themselves. You did more than that. You showed." From behind Ethan, Lily ran up, throwing her arms around Sarah with a joyful squeeze. "Can we do it again next year?" the little girl asked, her eyes shining. Sarah laughed, her hand gently smoothing Lily's hair. "I would love that." As the night wore on and the gathering began to wind down, Sarah found herself walking through the square, the soft lights casting a golden glow over the scene. Ethan joined her, the two moving quietly through the lingering crowd. "I got you something," Ethan said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a small, leather-bound notebook. Sarah looked at him, surprised. "For your ideas," he added. "For whatever comes next." She accepted the gift, running her fingers over the smooth cover, touched by the unexpected gesture. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but sure. "This means a lot." And there, beneath the stars and the soft flicker of lantern light, Sarah felt the certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. Not just safe, but seen, not just sheltered, but valued. She was not defined by what she had run from, but by what she was choosing to build, moment by moment. The soft light of early morning filtered through the curtains of the Miller home, casting gentle shadows across the wooden floors and filling the space with a golden warmth that hinted at the arrival of summer. Life inside the house had settled into an unspoken rhythm, a balance that seemed effortless, though beneath it lay the careful respect and patience of those who inhabited it. Ethan, Sarah, and Lily shared their days naturally, without the need to define what was unfolding between them. The laughter during meals, the quiet evenings spent reading or talking on the porch, the shared responsibility of everyday tasks, all these moments had created a bond that felt as stable as the hills surrounding their small town. Sarah continued her work at the cafe, where her presence was now a familiar comfort to the locals. Her interactions were no longer marked by cautious politeness, but by genuine ease. People sought her out, not just for their morning coffee, but for the kindness she offered freely, the soft encouragement she gave the children who came by after school, the way she remembered the smallest details of her customers' lives. Slowly, Maple Ridge had become more than a place to start over. It had become a home. Despite this sense of belonging, Sarah held on to her independence with quiet determination. Her decision to contribute financially to the household, to pay her own way, was never about mistrust but about honoring the promise she had made to herself, the day she chose to walk away from the life that others had planned for her. Ethan respected this boundary deeply, offering support without ever crossing the line into obligation. But as the weeks passed and the season shifted, Ethan found himself thinking more often about the space they shared, not just the physical space of the house, but the emotional one they had built together. There was a quiet yearning growing inside him, not rushed, not born from desperation, but from the genuine hope that Sarah might choose to make this place her permanent home, not out of necessity, but out of desire. One evening, as the air grew cooler and the sky blushed with the soft hues of dusk, Ethan sat on the porch, sketchbook resting on his knees, his pencil moving absently over the page. He was not drawing anything in particular, just lines and shapes, the motion itself soothing as he gathered his thoughts. Sarah stepped outside, a mug of tea in her hands, her expression relaxed after a long day. She took the seat beside him, leaning back, letting the silence between them settle comfortably before speaking. "You are quiet tonight," she observed, her tone light but curious. Ethan smiled faintly, closing the sketchbook and setting it aside. "Just thinking." Sarah turned slightly, her gaze resting on his face, waiting patiently. "There is something I have been wanting to ask you," Ethan began, his voice steady but softer than usual. "You have built something really beautiful here, Sarah, not just at the cafe or with the kids, but here, with us, with Lily and me." She listened intently, sensing the seriousness beneath his calm tone. "I know you have worked hard to stand on your own, and I respect that more than I can say," he continued. "But if you ever felt ready, if you ever wanted to make this your home officially, I would be honored to share it with you." The words hung between them, gentle and unforced, an invitation rather than a request. Sarah's eyes softened, but she remained silent for a moment, turning her gaze out toward the horizon where the sun dipped behind the trees. She felt the weight of the offer, not as a burden, but as something precious, something that deserved careful consideration. "I have thought about it," she admitted after a long pause. "This place, this life we are building here, it has become something I never imagined I would find. Safety, peace, joy even." She looked back at Ethan, her eyes bright but steady. "But I need to know that if I say yes, it is because I am choosing it fully, not because I am afraid of what comes next if I do not." Ethan nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "That is exactly what I want. I would never ask you to stay out of obligation, only if your heart tells you it is where you want to be." Sarah smiled, a small, sincere smile that reached her eyes. "Like that, with one condition." "Then yes," she said softly. "I would." Ethan raised his eyebrows, curious but already smiling. "I want to keep my independence," she continued. "I want to contribute, to hold on to the freedom I have fought so hard to claim. I need to know that being here is my choice every single day." Ethan leaned back, his smile warm and genuine. Of course, that was never in question. The conversation shifted then, the intensity of the moment giving way to the easy comfort that had always marked their time together. They spoke about small things, the garden they wanted to start, the books they planned to read, the next hiking trail they hoped to explore with Lily. But beneath every word was the quiet joy of knowing they had reached this place together, not through force or expectation, but through patience, kindness, and trust. When Sarah shared the news with Lily the next morning, the little girl's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. She threw her arms around Sarah, squeezing tightly. "Does that mean you are really staying?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Sarah knelt to Lily's level, brushing a strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "It means I am choosing to be here with you and your dad. Not just for now, but for as long as it feels right." Lily grinned, her happiness filling the room. The following days were marked by small changes around the house, nothing dramatic, but meaningful nonetheless. Sarah moved her things from the guest room, arranging the space to reflect her presence more fully. She and Ethan worked together to create a shared space that respected each of their needs, blending their lives not by erasing boundaries, but by honoring them. The sense of ease that followed was not born from grand gestures or declarations. but from the simple, steady commitment they shared, a promise made quietly, held not by obligation but by mutual care. As the sun set one evening, casting the familiar golden light through the windows, Sarah stood by the kitchen counter, preparing tea while Ethan read on the couch. Lily played nearby, humming one of the songs from their recent performance. There was a peace in the air, a sense of rightness that neither Ethan nor Sarah felt the need to question. This was not the life Sarah had once been told to want. It was not planned or polished or designed to impress. It was real. And it was hers. The air was soft with the first signs of summer, the scent of wildflowers mingling with the gentle warmth that settled over Maple Ridge as the season stretched its arms across the hills. The quiet life Sarah had embraced there was now marked by a sense of stability, a rhythm she had never experienced in the tightly choreographed days of her past. The home she shared with Ethan and Lily had become not just a shelter, but a place of chosen belonging, where each morning began without the weight of expectation and each evening closed with the ease of peace. Yet, even with the comfort that had blossomed in her new life, there remained a thread left untied, a connection to her past that had not yet been fully addressed. Though her parents had listened to her words the day she faced them after running from the wedding, the conversation had felt unfinished, resting on the surface of apology and misunderstanding, but not reaching the deeper roots of what had driven her to flee. Sarah knew that if she truly wanted to move forward, she would need to face that part of her story again, this time not from a place of fear or anger, but with the strength she had built since choosing her own path. One evening, while seated on the porch as the golden light faded into dusk, Sarah shared her thoughts with Ethan. Her voice was steady, though a hint of apprehension laced her words. "I think it is time I go back to talk to my parents," she said, her hands folded loosely in her lap. "Not because they expect it, but because I want to finish what I started that day." Ethan nodded, his expression gentle but certain. "Do you want me to come with you?" Sarah smiled softly, touched by his constant support. "No, I think I need to do this on my own." The next morning, she made the familiar drive to Crestwood. The road felt less intimidating this time, the memories along the way softened by the space she had put between herself and the life she had once been confined to. As the Jennings estate came into view, its manicured gardens and towering facade stood just as they always had, a monument to order and control, but they no longer held the same power over her. Her mother answered the door, surprised, but clearly relieved to see her standing there. The tension between them was still palpable, but it was tempered now by something closer to hope than resentment. "Sarah," her mother greeted, stepping aside to let her in. We did not expect you." "I wanted to come," Sarah replied simply. "Other. I think there are things we still need to say to each." Her father was seated in the sitting room, a newspaper folded neatly on the coffee table before him. He stood when she entered, his face reserved but attentive. "I'm glad you are here," he said quietly. They sat together, the same arrangement as the last time, but the air between them was different. There was no immediate rush to defend or accuse. Instead, there was a waiting, a shared understanding that this conversation mattered. "I know it was hard for you to understand why I left the way I did," Sarah began, her voice calm but clear. "I know it hurt you and I am sorry for that. But I need you to understand that staying would have hurt me in ways you never saw." Her mother's lips pressed together, and for a moment it seemed she might interrupt. But then she exhaled slowly and nodded for Sarah to continue. "I felt invisible," Sarah said. "Every decision was made without me, as if my voice did not count. The dress, the venue, the guest list, but it was more than that. It was my life. And every time I tried to speak up, I was told I was overreacting, that I would understand later, that this was how things were done." She paused, looking between her parents, her gaze steady. "I ran because it was the only way I could make you hear me." Her father leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. "We thought we were protecting you," he said softly. "Wished we had. Stability, respect, opportunity. We thought we were giving you the life we—" Sarah nodded slowly, the edges of her expression softening. "I know you meant well, but the life you wanted for me was not the life I wanted for myself. Stability does not mean living by someone else's choices. Her mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for the first time the defensiveness in her posture began to fade. "I was so afraid," her mother whispered, "that if you did not follow the path we laid out, you would end up unhappy, alone or struggling. I thought I was helping you avoid mistakes." Sarah's voice softened but remained steady. "But mistakes are how we learn. They are how we find out who we really are. I was never afraid of struggle, Mom. I was afraid of not being able to live my own life." The room fell into a thoughtful silence, the weight of their words settling over them like the gentle dust of an opened attic. For the first time, the conversation did not end in frustration or misunderstanding. There was space between their sentences, enough room for reflection, and perhaps the beginning of true reconciliation. Her father broke the silence with a quiet sigh. "I see you now, Sarah," he said. "Become, and I am proud of her. Not as the daughter I planned for, but as the woman you have." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, not from pain, but from the quiet relief of finally hearing the words she had longed for. Her mother reached out then, hesitating only a moment before taking Sarah's hand in hers. "I want to know more about your life," her mother said softly. "What makes you happy?" "About where you are now." "About." Sarah squeezed her mother's hand gently, feeling the walls between them begin to lower. Not all at once, but enough to allow something new to grow. "I will tell you," she promised, "if you are willing to listen." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, not about plans or expectations, but about simple things: Sarah's work at the cafe, the children she taught, the community she was learning to call her own. She spoke of Lily's bright spirit and Ethan's quiet strength, though she did not define what Ethan was to her. It was enough for now to share the peace she had found. When she finally stood to leave, her father embraced her without hesitation, holding her longer than he ever had before. Her mother followed, the hug softer, tentative, but real. As Sarah drove back to Maple Ridge, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields. But for the first time, those shadows did not seem like threats. They were simply part of the landscape, natural and expected, balanced by the light. When she returned home, Ethan was on the porch, reading. He looked up as she approached, his face open, ready to listen if she wanted to share. "How did it go?" he asked. Sarah smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "It went well. Better than I hoped." Ethan nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. "Would you like some tea?" he offered, standing. Sarah nodded, taking his hand as they walked inside together, knowing that the hardest words had finally been spoken, and the road ahead was clearer because of it. The rhythm of life in Maple Ridge continued its gentle course, marked by the small, steady joys of daily living. Sarah, now more at peace with herself and with her past, embraced her days with a newfound lightness. The conversation with her parents had not erased all the complexities of their relationship, but it had opened a door to understanding, to patience, to the possibility of a relationship no longer built on obligation, but on choice. Back, in the warm familiarity of the Miller home, the routine had settled into a comfortable pattern. Mornings began with the soft shuffle of Lily's footsteps as she made her way downstairs, followed by the aroma of Ethan's coffee brewing in the kitchen and the quiet sound of pages turning as he read through his latest illustrations. Sarah often joined them at the table, her notebook nearby, sometimes jotting down ideas, sometimes simply enjoying the quiet company. The ease between them was natural, unspoken. There were no grand declarations, no defined promises, but the bond they shared continued to deepen through the small, consistent acts of kindness that filled their days. Ethan's steady presence, always supportive without being intrusive, gave Sarah the space she needed to remain true to herself. Lily's enthusiasm, her bright laughter and endless curiosity brought joy into every corner of the house. It was Lily who, without realizing it, continued to weave the three of them closer together. She often suggested weekend activities, picnics by the lake, hikes along the forest trails, movie nights with popcorn and blankets spread out across the living room floor. Each suggestion was met with warmth, and each moment shared only strengthened the ties between them. One sunny afternoon, as they returned from a walk along the river, Lily ran ahead toward the house, her laughter echoing between the trees. Ethan and Sarah followed at a slower pace, their steps in sync, their conversation soft. "I never imagined life could feel this simple," Sarah said, her gaze fixed on the winding path ahead. "Not because it lacks meaning, but because it feels real." Ethan glanced at her, the corners of his mouth lifting into a smile. "It takes work to make life feel this steady." "Simple does not mean easy." Sarah nodded, understanding. The truth in his words. The steadiness they shared had not come by accident. It had been built piece by piece, through choices made each day to respect, to care, to show up. The ease of their bond became even more evident during the small traditions that began to emerge naturally. Sunday afternoons became their time for shared meals, often joined by neighbors or friends from town. Sarah found joy in preparing dishes she remembered from childhood, sometimes teaching Lily how to cook, guiding her small hands through recipes with gentle patience. Ethan contributed his own quiet rituals to these gatherings, setting the table, selecting music to play softly in the background, ensuring that the mood of the home remained warm and inviting. Their guests always remarked on the harmony between them, though no one dared to label the relationship that was so clearly growing into something special. In the evenings after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan and Sarah often found themselves on the porch, a pot of tea between them, their conversations, drifting from the events of the day to dreams for the future. They spoke of small things at first, the garden they wanted to plant, the books they hoped to read, but as the nights passed, their talks grew deeper. "I have thought about going back to school," Sarah shared one evening, her voice thoughtful. "Not for anyone else, just for me." Ethan listened without interrupting, his gaze steady. "What would you want to study?" "Music therapy," she replied. "I have seen how much joy teaching the children brings me, how powerful music can be. I think I would like to understand more about how to use it to help others heal." Ethan smiled, a look of pride softening his features. "That sounds like something worth pursuing." Sarah returned the smile, feeling the sincerity. In his words, there was no doubt in his encouragement, no shadow of expectation, only support. The bond between Sarah and Lily also grew stronger with each passing day. Lily often confided in Sarah about her small worries, her school adventures, the stories she dreamed up late at night. Sarah listened with genuine interest, offering advice, only when asked, always respecting the little girl's feelings. One evening, as Lily worked on a drawing at the kitchen table, she looked up at Sarah with a serious expression. "Do you think you will stay forever?" Lily asked, her voice soft but hopeful. Sarah set down the dish she was drying and moved to sit beside Lily, brushing a hand gently over the girl's hair. "I cannot promise forever," Sarah answered honestly, her voice tender. "Right now, there is nowhere else I would rather be, but I can promise that." Lily smiled, satisfied with the answer, and leaned against Sarah's side, the comfort between them clear. The seasons continued their gentle turn, bringing with them the lush greenery of summer, the crisp breeze of autumn, the quiet hush of winter's first snowfall. Through each change, the connection between Sarah, Ethan, and Lily deepened naturally, without the need for definition or labels. They built traditions together, apple picking in the fall, decorating the house with handmade crafts for the holidays, long winter nights spent by the fire telling stories. These moments wove themselves into the fabric of their lives, strengthening the ties between them, not through dramatic gestures but through the shared simplicity of living. And though none of them spoke directly of what the future might hold, each step they took together whispered the truth that had been growing quietly all along. They were becoming a family, not by blood, not by obligation, but by choice. The winter air settled gently over Maple Ridge, bringing with it the quiet charm of the season. Snow had begun to dust the rooftops and trees, casting a soft white glow across the familiar paths and trails. Inside the Miller home, warmth radiated from the crackling fire, filling the space with a sense of peace that reflected the life they had carefully built together over the months. The days moved steadily toward the year's end, each one marked by simple joys, shared meals, and the comforting rhythm of a household now fully in sync. With the holidays approaching, the town stirred with preparation. Storefronts were dressed in evergreen garlands, lights twinkled along the streets, and the smell of cinnamon and pine floated from every corner. At the cafe, Sarah worked with Margaret to create a seasonal menu, sharing laughter and recipes while helping to organize the holiday events that brought the community together. She felt a satisfaction deeper than she had ever known, one that came not from grand achievements, but from being present, from contributing meaningfully to the place she had chosen to call home. Ethan, ever attentive, continued his work while ensuring that Lily's excitement for the season was fully embraced. Together, they decorated the house, each ornament placed with care, each string of lights hung thoughtfully. Lily, full of anticipation, counted down the days until Christmas, her enthusiasm infectious as she sang songs around the house and helped Sarah bake cookies, their kitchen filled with the sweet scent of vanilla and sugar. In the midst of this quiet happiness, Ethan and Sarah found their connection deepening further. Their shared experiences had built a foundation not rushed by declarations, but made steady by consistent presence. Conversations between them often drifted into dreams of the future, not in distant, abstract terms, but in the everyday hopes they now felt safe enough to voice. "I have been thinking," Ethan said one evening as they sat together on the couch, the glow of the fire soft against their faces. "Maybe in the spring, we could build that garden we talked about. It could be a project for all of us." Sarah smiled, the warmth of the idea settling easily into her heart. Grow together. "I would like that. A space we..." Their plans were never about impressing anyone. They were about building a life that reflected who they were, free from the weight of past expectations. As Christmas Eve approached, Ethan and Lily worked secretly on a surprise for Sarah, whispering between themselves and sneaking around the house with the kind of joy that comes from preparing something for someone they deeply care about. Sarah, amused but respecting their wish for secrecy, chose not to press for details, content to let them have their fun. When the evening finally arrived, the house glowed softly under the twinkling lights strung along the windows. Outside, the snow continued to fall gently, blanketing the ground in quiet stillness. Inside, the air was filled with the sound of laughter and the soft melodies of holiday music playing from the old record player. After dinner, Lily grabbed Sarah's hand, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Come on, we have a surprise for you," she announced, leading Sarah toward the living room where Ethan stood waiting, a gentle smile on his face. In the center of the room stood a small arrangement of chairs, facing the upright piano that Sarah had played so many times with the children. Draped across the back of the chairs were handmade paper programs, each one decorated with drawings, of stars and music notes. Lily handed Sarah one of the programs proudly. "Tonight's recital, Sarah Jennings." Sarah looked at the paper, then at Ethan and Lily, her eyes wide with surprise and touched by the sweetness of their gesture. "We thought," Ethan began, his voice soft but sure, "that maybe tonight could be about celebrating not just the season, but everything you have brought into our lives." Lily nodded enthusiastically. "You always help everyone else. Now it is your turn." Moved by their thoughtfulness, Sarah took her place at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. She looked at Ethan and Lily, their faces glowing with affection and pride, and felt a swell of emotion rise within her. Without hesitation, she began to play, the familiar melody filling the room with its soft, steady rhythm. The music flowed easily, each note carrying with it the gratitude and peace Sarah felt, the journey of finding her place, of choosing her path. As her hands moved across the keys, her eyes occasionally lifted to meet Ethan's gaze, finding there the same steady encouragement that had carried her through so many uncertain moments. When the final note drifted into silence, Lily clapped eagerly, her small hands coming together with enthusiasm. Ethan stood, crossing the room to take Sarah's hand, his eyes holding hers with quiet certainty. "That was beautiful," he said softly. Sarah smiled, the warmth of the moment wrapping around her like the glow of the fire behind them. She felt seen, cherished, not for who others wanted her to be, but for who she truly was. As the evening drew on, they shared stories. Memories of the year now closing, hopes for the one about to begin. There was no need for dramatic pronouncements. Their bond had been forged through everyday moments, through the trust and patience they had given one another without expectation. When the time came to put Lily to bed, Sarah followed Ethan upstairs, listening to the soft sound of his voice as he tucked the little girl in, whispering goodnight with the same care he showed in everything he did. Watching from the doorway, Sarah felt her heart swell with affection, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Later, as the fire burned low and the house settled into quiet, Ethan and Sarah sat together once more, the night calm around them. "I never imagined this life," Sarah said softly. Her gaze turned toward the window where the snow continued to fall. "But I am grateful for it, grateful for the chance to choose." Ethan reached for her hand, holding it gently between his. "Sometimes the best beginnings are the ones we never planned," he replied. In the peaceful silence that followed, the warmth between them spoke all the words they did not need to say. There, in the quiet glow of the fire, surrounded by the simple joys of the home they had built together, Sarah knew this was more than just a new chapter. It was truly a new beginning.